Sign this, or you'll never work in finance again. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were loud. Ronan Pike delivered them in a whisper, but because of what they meant. A threat, dressed up in calm professionalism, handed to me across a cold glass table in a windowless conference room. I looked down at the resignation letter he'd just slid toward me. The words, voluntary departure, stared back like an accusation. My hand hovered above the pen, but my mind screamed, this isn't right. 3 weeks ago, I uncovered a pattern: quiet, deliberate misallocations buried inside quarterly reports. At first, I thought they were clerical mistakes. Then I noticed they all linked to Ronan's department. Vendor contracts with inflated prices. Budget transfers with no proper sign-off. It didn't take long to see the structure beneath the chaos. So I asked questions. And now, here I was. Alone, blindsided, with security waiting outside and a man across from me who wore victory like cologne. You've been underperforming, he added, almost casually. This is really for your own good. Underperforming? I'd saved this company $4 million in operational redundancies last year alone. I'd worked late, skipped holidays, trained new hires, held this department together when Ronan disappeared for his so-called strategy retreats. And now I was disposable? This wasn't a resignation. It was an execution: quiet, clinical, and perfectly timed. But here's the part he didn't know. I'd seen this coming. And I came prepared. Still, my hands trembled as I picked up the pen. One signature, and everything I'd built would vanish. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to turn this against him. Before we go any further, I need to ask. Have you ever been backed into a corner and told to surrender when you knew you were right? If that's you, leave a comment that simply says, I've been there. Because this story? It isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when you change one word and shift the balance of power forever. My name is Madeline Shore. I'm 36 years old, unmarried, and currently, if unofficially, unemployed. Up until 3 days ago, I was the senior risk controller at Harper Cross Holdings, one of the most respected financial consulting firms in Chicago. Or, at least, that's what we called ourselves in every annual report and coffee mug slogan. People often described me as quiet, methodical, precise, the kind of person who highlights meeting notes in color-coded categories and double-checks formulas in spreadsheets no one else bothers to review. Some said I was too serious. Others found me intimidating, not because I raised my voice, but because I rarely had to. Growing up, I was the kid who took apart the family radio just to understand how it worked, and then reassembled it more efficiently. My father called me his little engineer, even though I never studied engineering. I took that same curiosity and control into finance, into patterns and systems, into understanding what people try to hide between lines and numbers. I wasn't chasing power. I was chasing clarity. When I joined Harper Cross 9 years ago, the company was small but ambitious. By year 2, I'd rewritten their internal audit protocols. By year 5, I was leading cross-departmental fraud risk assessments. I'd built a reputation: not loud, not flashy, but dependable. I didn't play office politics. I didn't need to. Until Ronan Pike transferred in. He came from the firm's Manhattan branch with glowing praise and an aura of arrogance that no one seemed to question. Charismatic, sharp-dressed, and always networking, he shook hands like he was always closing a deal, even when the only thing on the table was a team lunch order. At first, he seemed impressed by my work. He copied my templates, quoted my data models in leadership meetings. I thought maybe I'd finally met someone who valued substance over showmanship. I was wrong. It started small. My name left off email chains I used to be copied on. Project credits shifted. Budgets I was meant to oversee were rerouted without explanation. I flagged it twice. Each time, I was told it was an oversight. Then came the meetings where I was present but invisible. Ronan would take over the conversation, present my findings as his department's, and I'd sit there, silent, because speaking up felt petty, and because part of me hoped someone else would notice. No one did. Still, I didn't break routine. I documented everything. I saved every version, every thread, every calendar adjustment. That's how I survive by being liked, but by being impossible to discredit. The funny thing is, when people think of precision, they think of coldness. But for me, it's a kind of care. A way to protect things that matter: systems, truth, people. And somewhere along the line, I realized I wasn't just documenting patterns in finance anymore. I was documenting a pattern in behavior. A pattern that would soon become undeniable. It started with a missing name. One of our internal reports, a quarterly compliance summary I'd authored, formatted, and submitted, was forwarded to the executive team. Except when it landed in the VP's inbox, the byline read, "Compiled by the Office of Financial Strategy," which technically included me, but also everyone else. And the version that reached leadership didn't have my signature anywhere. I reread it 3 times just to be sure. Same charts. Same insights. Even my color-coded annotations had been kept. Only my name had vanished. At first, I chalked it up to miscommunication. Mistakes happen. People get rushed. Maybe Ronan forgot to credit me when packaging the materials for the board. So I walked into his office calm, polite, and asked. He didn't look up from his laptop. Oh, that? It needed to be streamlined for exec-level visibility. Group credit made more sense. I nodded slowly. Understood. Would have appreciated a heads up, that's all. Ju Hao. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll keep that in mind. He didn't. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening: small erasures, almost elegant in their subtlety. Reports I wrote were suddenly team efforts. Meetings I'd led were summarized by someone else. Budget reviews I'd spearheaded were delegated to junior analysts, even though I was still doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes. At the monthly department roundup, Ronan presented a new dashboard model. Madeline referred to it as something we've been exploring on the strategy side. Not once did he glance in my direction. People clapped. I smiled tightly and made a note of the exact phrasing. It wasn't just professional theft. It was something more deliberate, a slow fade from visibility. Not enough to scream discrimination. Not enough to file a formal complaint. But enough that I felt myself becoming invisible in a place where I'd once been central. One morning, I logged into the project management portal and noticed I'd been unassigned from a multi-department initiative I helped design. No explanation. No replacement. Just a quiet removal. When I asked the admin assistant if there'd been a reshuffle, she looked at me like I should already know. "Oh, I think Ronan said it didn't align with your current scope," she mumbled. "But I'm not totally sure." Dine. My scope, apparently, was being redrawn without me. The worst part wasn't the exclusion, it was the gaslighting. Every time I asked a question, I was met with vague half-smiles and managerial phrases like realignment, team cohesion, or strategy pivots. One afternoon, I brought it up with a colleague I trusted, Mira, from internal audit. "Is it just me?" I asked. "Or has Ronan been removing me from things?" She hesitated. "I've noticed. But he's doing it carefully. Nothing you can prove without sounding paranoid." That word paranoid rang in my ears for the rest of the day. That was the trap, wasn't it? Make the erosion so slow, so quiet, that when you finally push back, you sound unstable, overly sensitive, emotional. And in a field like ours, those labels are career poison. But they'd underestimated me. Because I don't forget patterns. And by now, I'd started building a new one. Not of numbers, but of erasures. The first discrepancy was small, almost meaningless, if you weren't looking closely. A vendor invoice had been routed through the wrong department. A simple misclassification, maybe a tired employee, maybe a glitch in the submission system. I flagged it, corrected it, moved on. But something about it stuck in my head. A few days later, it happened again. Different vendor. Different department. Same kind of routing error. So I pulled the data for that quarter's interdepartmental transfers, just to satisfy my own curiosity. That's when I saw the pattern. It was like watching threads of a spider web emerge under UV light, barely there until you shifted your perspective. Each thread on its own? Unremarkable. But together, they formed a lattice of irregularities. The transfers were consistently small under the threshold for automatic audit. Clever. They also funneled through departments Ronan either directly managed or had recently realigned. Cleverer still. Each one involved a vendor name I didn't recognize. So I cross-referenced. Most of them were LLCs incorporated less than 2 years ago. A few didn't even have functional websites. One led to a P.O. box in suburban New Jersey. And every single one had been approved using a fast-track protocol I'd designed for urgent pandemic response projects. That protocol required 2 sign-offs. But in these cases, only one appeared. Ronan's. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 mugs of cold coffee, 14 open spreadsheets, and a sinking feeling in my gut. I rechecked everything. Downloaded backups. Saved paper copies. If I was wrong, I was about to look ridiculous. If I was right, I was staring at the tip of something massive. The following morning, I asked Ronan directly. "Hey," I said casually, holding a highlighted report. "This transfer from Strategic Ops to Vendor 413BU signed off on this?" He barely glanced at the page. "It's fine. Standard reallocation. But the documentation's incomplete." He looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, his smile didn't feel performative. It felt like a mask slipping. "This isn't your concern, Madeline." His tone wasn't sharp. It was soft. Controlled. Like a hand tightening just slightly around your wrist. After that conversation, things shifted. My access to certain financial dashboards was revoked pending updates. One of my upcoming project reviews was reassigned without notice. My calendar started filling with pointless meetings that kept me from doing real work. And suddenly, my name came up in HR. Someone had flagged communication inconsistencies. I didn't need anyone to tell me what was happening. He'd seen that I'd seen. And now, he was getting ready to erase more than just my name from a document. But here's the thing. I know how to follow numbers the way some people follow scent. I know when something doesn't add up, and I know how to prove it. So I did what I've always done best. I opened a blank spreadsheet and started documenting everything. They moved my desk without saying a word. New email. New explanation. I came in Monday morning and found my monitor disconnected, my plant sitting on the floor like it had been dropped in a rush. A yellow sticky note on the screen read, "You've been reassigned to 7C. It will reconnect you." 7C wasn't on my floor. It wasn't even in my department's cluster. It was down near the server room, an icy hallway of windowless cubes, humming with the constant noise of industrial ventilation and backup generators. The kind of place where you couldn't think clearly, let alone hear yourself on a phone call. I sat down at the bare desk. No photos. No files. No colleagues in sight. Just a single power outlet and a flickering overhead light that buzzed like it resented me being there. I typed an email to facilities asking for clarification. No response. Later that morning, I ran into Jordan from IT. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away. "Temporary overflow," he mumbled. "That's what they said." Oh, they. Always. They. Never a name, never a face. I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what this was. Exile disguised as logistics. When your name is too clean to fire, but your presence is too dangerous to ignore, this is what they do. They isolate you. Make you invisible. Not just to leadership, but to your peers. They make it look like you're drifting away by choice. That week, I was excluded from 3 meetings I used to lead. When I asked why, I was told the agendas had shifted. One recurring project update mysteriously vanished from my calendar altogether. A junior analyst was assigned to take over transition tasks I wasn't told I was transitioning. And slowly, the silence set in. People in the kitchen stopped making eye contact. My chat messages went unanswered. Even Mira, who had once confided in me, replied to my check-in with a curt, "Haven't heard anything. Hope you're okay." It's strange how loud the absence of noise can feel. I went from being essential to ambient. And yet, beneath all that, beneath the buzzing lights and empty inbox, I felt something else start to build. Resolve. Because they'd made a mistake. They thought isolation would make me back down. That being removed from the room meant I couldn't see what was happening inside it. But what they forgot is that people like me, we don't need proximity to gather proof. We just need a signal. And a place to think. And strangely enough, the corner next to the servers gave me both. I started using noise-canceling headphones and worked after hours, when the office was quiet and no one watched my screen. I archived emails, exported audit logs. I built a private timeline so detailed it could have doubled as a prosecution outline. Every time they pushed me further out, I pushed my documentation further in. They wanted to erase me. Instead, they gave me space. And I used it. I stopped trying to get my old desk back. I stopped asking questions that never got answered, and I stopped pretending I was still part of any team. Because the truth was, I'd already started building something else. It began with a folder. I named it Northlight, after a type of clean, natural illumination photographers use to reveal true detail. At first, it lived on a flash drive in my purse. Eventually, I built a more secure version on an encrypted external hard drive, air-gapped, password-protected, zero cloud sync. Inside it, dates, memos, approval chains, PDF printouts of budget transfer forms before they were wiped from the shared server, screenshots of discrepancies, comparison spreadsheets, audio files, meeting invites that had vanished from my calendar, recovered from cached notifications. Every piece, labeled and timestamped. Because if this went where I suspected it would, memory alone wouldn't be enough. I'd need evidence, patterns, consistency, and above all, credibility. I became meticulous in my movements. Never raised my voice. Never missed a deadline, even when my assignments were meaningless. I dressed exactly the same each day. Neutral, professional, forgettable. I wanted no one to remember a single excuse to discredit me. In parallel, I started doing something else. Studying. At night, after I left the office, I'd stop by the 2-4-hour law library 2 blocks from my apartment. It was mostly used by paralegals and students cramming for exams, but the staff knew me by name within 2 weeks. I wasn't reading legal theory. I was reading precedent. Constructive termination. Whistleblower protections. Internal retaliation. Document admissibility in civil court. I made flashcards, annotated case law, created timelines of known settlements in corporate fraud cases. Not to go to court, necessarily, but to know what I was up against. To know the playbook they might try using against me. And then, when the folder was full and my hands were steady again, I made a single phone call. "Delia Knox's office," a voice answered. "How can I help?" I hesitated, then said, "I need to schedule a consultation. Employment law. Workplace retaliation." I made fro. There was a pause. Then, would tomorrow at 3 work? I agreed. Wrote it down. Hung up. The next afternoon, Delia greeted me in a gray suit with sharper posture than any courtroom I'd ever seen. Her office smelled like paper and cedar. No frills. No distractions. I handed her the folder. Watched her eyebrows rise as she flipped through the contents, page after page. "This," she said finally, "is incredibly well documented. I thought it might be useful." She looked up, smiled. "You didn't just prepare a case, you built a foundation. That's rare." I didn't smile back. "They're setting me up for a forced resignation. I need to be ready." "You are," she said. Then she leaned forward. "Now let's talk strategy." They scheduled the meeting for 9:00 a.m. No agenda. No subject line. Just mandatory check-in. Conference room 4A. The invite came from Ronan's assistant. No one else was listed. I didn't need confirmation. I knew exactly what it was. The final move. I wore navy subdued, neutral, professional. Nothing bold enough to be called defiant, but nothing soft enough to suggest surrender. My folder, the same one I'd shown Delia, stayed zipped in my bag. My phone? Already recording, tucked inside the side pocket of my blazer. When I arrived, Ronan was already seated, a resignation letter neatly placed at the center of the glass table between us. There was no water. No HR rep. No pleasantries. Madeline, he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite. Thank you for being on time. I sat down without responding. He tapped the letter. I think you'll find this is the cleanest solution for everyone. I scanned it briefly. It was exactly what Delia had predicted. A standard voluntary resignation template, dated and signed on their end. Just one blank space remained for my name. You can take the rest of the week to gather your things. No hard feelings, he added, almost cheerfully. You'll get a solid reference. We want this to be amicable. Amicable. The word clanged in my ears like an insult. I lifted the pen slowly. My fingers didn't tremble. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind for days, right down to the rhythm of my handwriting. On the line that read voluntary resignation, I struck out the word voluntary with a single, clean line. Above it, in steady block letters, I wrote, constructive termination due to hostile work environment. Then I added the date. The time. My initials in the margin. I capped the pen, placed it beside the page, and waited. Ronan was still looking at his phone. When he finally glanced over, he saw only the signature and the absence of protest. He smiled smug, triumphant. He didn't read it. Great, he said. Clear your workspace by noon. Security will escort you. I stood. Calmly. I'll also need a copy of this for my records. He hesitated for half a second. HR will send it. I nodded, moved toward the door. Then paused. This meeting, I said over my shoulder, was scheduled at your request to discuss my employment status? He blinked. Yes. As noted. Perfect. Thank you for confirming. And I left. My heart was pounding, but not with panic. Not this time. With clarity. Downstairs, I stepped into the nearest restroom stall and pulled out my phone. Delia. I whispered, after she picked up. It's done. Just like we planned. Did you change the wording? Yes. End of section. He didn't catch it? Number. Good, she said. Email me everything. We'll file the complaint before lunch. If you've ever been backed into a corner and knew you had one last move left tone that no one saw coming, drop a comment below that says, dare. Because sometimes, one word, just one, is enough to rewrite the ending entirely. The phone call came just after 7 a.m. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. This is Madeline Shore. This. A familiar voice replied, tightly controlled. Miss Shore, this is Sylvia Grant from Human Resources. We've reviewed your documentation. We'd like to meet this morning on the 20 the floor, conference room B. For a beat, I said nothing. Just listen to the quiet tension behind her voice. She added, senior leadership will be present. I let the silence hang for a moment longer before responding. I'll be there at 9. With counsel. A pause. Understood. Debut. By 8:30. I was sitting across from Delia Knox at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Harper Cross Tower. She was already in litigation, moted arc gray suit, leather folio, eyes like sharpened glass. She slid a sheet of notes toward me. They're spooked, she said. 3 voicemails from their general counsel overnight, none of them threatening, all of them eager. I glanced down at the summary she'd prepared. How eager are we talking? Eager enough to schedule an unscheduled meeting with the entire C-suite at 9 a.m. She replied. We walked the final block together, side by side in the summer wind. When we entered the building, the receptionist at the front desk blinked in surprise. But she didn't stop us. She couldn't. Our visitor badges printed in silence. 20th floor. Executive level. As the elevator rose, I watched the lights count upward. At 14, I felt the shift in gravity. At 17, the silence grew louder. At 20, the doors opened into polished wood, soft carpet, and controlled chaos. Assistants whispered. Two partners I recognized from strategy looked up as I passed, then looked away quickly. Someone was being scolded in the corner office. The tension in the air was as thick as lacquer. Outside conference room B, a woman in navy stepped forward. Sylvia from HR. She didn't smile. Miss Shore, Miss Knox, thank you for coming. Inside, 5 people waited. At the center of the table, Ellen Vickers, the COO. To her left, the legal counsel. To her right, the chief audit executive. Ronan wasn't there. No coffee. No pastries. Just water and silence. Ellen opened with protocol. Then she asked me to speak. I didn't. Delia did. She laid out the timeline, the pattern, the documentation, the annotated transactions. She used phrases like systemic negligence, retaliatory behavior, and intentional obfuscation of compliance controls. She slid forward a printed copy of the altered resignation letter. Sylvia paled when she saw the edit. Legal asked a few questions. Mostly procedural. No one challenged the facts. When they finally asked what we wanted, Delia answered without blinking. Full reinstatement. Back pay. Independent audit. Policy overhaul. And no further supervision from Mr. Pike. W2. The room went still. Then Ellen leaned forward. Mr. Pike has been placed on administrative leave effective this morning. An external compliance review is already underway. I nodded, once. Delia gathered the documents. We stood. As we stepped out of the room, I heard one assistant murmur. She really came back. And yes, I had. Not just to return to my job, but to take back my name, my place, my voice. By the time I returned to my floor, everything had shifted. The hallway was quieter, but not the normal kind of quiet. It was the kind that settles in just before a thunderstorm. Conversations died when I passed. Eyes followed, but no one said anything. Except Mira. She caught up to me near the printer. They pulled all of Ronan's access this morning, she whispered. Locked down the finance share drive. The audit team is already in his office. I nodded once. Thanks for telling me. I should have done more, she said, voice low. I saw what he was doing. What matters, I interrupted gently, is that you're saying something now. She nodded, quickly, and walked away. By noon, the email went out. Independent third-party investigation into internal financial processes to begin this week. Staff cooperation is expected and protected. That last word, protected, wasn't one I'd seen Harpercross use before. By Friday, I was reassigned to a temporary office 2 doors down from the chief audit executive. Not hidden. Not punished. Positioned. People started stopping by again. Some asked questions, cautiously. Others just dropped off coffee without a word. A few apologized for their silence. Most didn't need to. I knew how fear worked here. But even so, something was breaking open. I began noticing ripple effects. Junior staff members asked more questions in meetings. People started CCing legal on budget approvals. The leadership team began showing up to team check-ins that they'd previously ignored. A week later, Mira sent me a screenshot of an anonymous Slack message that had gone semi-viral inside the company. She didn't burn it down, she just turned on the lights. I didn't respond. But I saved it. Then came the numbers. The audit team uncovered 3 years' worth of internal transfer, small, deliberate movements, always just under the review threshold. A half-dozen shell vendors. A pattern of contract renewals tied to budget spikes that aligned with performance bonus windows. When I reviewed the preliminary report, the total flagged amount was over $1.6 million. Every item was connected to Ronan Pike. He hadn't just manipulated data. He'd built an ecosystem of siphoning quiet, efficient, and hidden in plain sight. I sat with that number for a long time. Not because of the amount, but because of how long it had gone unnoticed. And how many smart, capable people had been trained to ignore the signs. Late one afternoon, Delia called. They're weighing options. Internal recovery. Possible cooperation with law enforcement. No one's saying it out loud yet, but it's heading there. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. Do they still think this can be contained? No, she said. Not anymore. Ugh. The reckoning had begun not with fire or fury, but with file folders and timelines and initials in the margin. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like something deeper. Exposure. And finally, truth. It was subtle at first. A nod from someone who used to avoid eye contact. An extra second of silence before a door closed. Side conversations ending just a little too abruptly when I walked by. But then, the ripple became a wave. It started with a woman from contracts someone I barely knew. She stopped by my desk late one afternoon, looked around, then said in a low voice, I filed a report about Ronan. From last year. It went nowhere. She didn't wait for my response. Just left a small envelope on my keyboard and walked off. Inside, a printed email chain. A timeline. Her name, blacked out. The next day, a man from procurement pulled me aside near the elevators. I checked those vendors, he whispered. One of them used my signature without consent. I never approved that. P.O. By the end of the week, 6 employees had come forward. Then 10. By the following Monday, the count was up to 13. Some had been ignored, others had been silenced. A few had tried to speak, but no one had listened until now. There were moments, standing in the middle of the office, when I felt like I was hearing an entirely new language, not spoken aloud, but expressed through glances, energy shifts, the way people looked at the door before speaking. This was what institutional fear sounded like when it began to lift. The culture at Harper Cross had always been described as tight-knit, driven, high-performing. But beneath that had been a second current unspoken hierarchies, unofficial power channels, and consequences that arrived quietly for those who challenged them. Now, for the first time, people were beginning to name what they'd endured. And each new voice made the next one louder. HR began hosting open-door sessions with legal observers present. Anonymous complaint lines surged. Department heads were instructed to review all existing vendor contracts. Someone removed Ronan's name from the internal directory, but not before someone else printed out the old staff photo and pinned it folded in half to the break room corkboard. When I walked into the kitchen one morning, I found 2 post-it notes stuck beside it. One said, "Not again." The other, "Never again." The shift was slow, but steady. A recalibration. Managers began to reference transparency in meetings. The audit team gave weekly updates over email. IT implemented mandatory 2-step sign-offs for vendor accounts. People were still afraid, but now they were alert. And maybe most importantly now, they were looking. A few coworkers still kept their distance, unsure where the lines had been redrawn. But others stopped me in hallways, left small messages on my desk. Quiet gratitude. Respect not for what I'd done, but for what it had made possible. I didn't ask for any of it. I wasn't trying to become a symbol. But somehow, the story had echoed farther than I expected. And as I sat in my small windowed office, just 1 floor below where Ronan once ruled, I realized something simple and strange. Change had a sound. And now, the building was full of it. 3 weeks after the investigation began, I received a calendar invite titled Private Conversation, Executive Level. No subject. No details. But the sender was Ellen Vickers, our Chief Operating Officer. I arrived on time. Her office was quieter than I remembered. A single lamp lit the space, warm and indirect. She didn't sit behind her desk, but instead gestured toward a small round table by the window. 2 chairs. No barriers. "Thank you for coming, Madeline," she said, her voice low but steady. I nodded, unsure whether this was an apology, a negotiation, or something else entirely. She got to it quickly. "We'd like to offer you a new position," she said. "Director of Integrity Oversight. You'd report directly to me. It would consolidate risk, ethics, and compliance into one role with real authority, not just paper structure." I didn't respond right away. Part of me had expected this. The other part had no idea what to feel. She continued, "You wouldn't be responsible for cleaning up the past. That's already in motion. But you would help design the system that ensures it doesn't happen again." A moment passed. I asked the only question that mattered to me. Would I be listened to this time? Ellen didn't blink. "You'd be empowered." I nodded. "And Ronan?" She drew a slow breath. "He's no longer with the company. Officially, he resigned, but legal proceedings are ongoing." There was nothing left to say. The meeting ended with a handshake, firm and professional. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen counter, the city lights stretching out through the window behind me, my laptop open but untouched. The offer letter sat beside my tea. It was generous. The salary, the terms, the authority. But that wasn't why I was staring at it. I was trying to decide if I wanted to say yes. Because this wasn't about title or money anymore. It was about trust. About whether I believed this company could change. About whether I believed I could be part of that change without losing the clarity I'd fought so hard to reclaim. As I sat there in silence, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before picking up. The message was short. "Hope you're satisfied. You ruined me." No name. But I didn't need one. It was Ronan. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering above the reply bubble, and then placed the phone face down on the counter. There was no satisfaction in what happened to him. No joy in watching someone unravel by their own design. The only thing I felt truly was relief. Relief that I hadn't let myself be dragged under with him. The next morning, I signed the offer. With a clear head. And no regrets. 6 months after I crossed out the word voluntary and wrote something truer in its place, I found myself standing at the front of a conference room packed with people. It was the annual Compliance Summit and Industry event I used to attend from the back row, mostly for the data panels and the free coffee. But this year, I wasn't an attendee. I was a speaker. Ellen introduced me as the woman who rewrote our understanding of accountability. The words felt too large, too polished. But when I stepped up to the podium and looked out over the crowd, colleagues, peers, even a few quiet skeptics, I didn't feel nervous. I felt grounded. I spoke without slides. "I want to talk to you," I began, "about a signature." The room went still. 6 months ago, I was given a resignation letter and told to sign either risk everything I'd worked for. I signed it, but I changed one word. And that single act set off a chain of events no one in that room expected, not even me. I paused. Let the quiet settle. That change didn't come from bravery. It came from clarity, from preparation, from knowing my worth, even when others didn't. Behind the silence, I could feel the weight of that moment land. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't leak a memo. I didn't send an angry email blast. I just refused to be erased. Later that day, after the panel ended, people came up to shake my hand. A woman in her 50s leaned in and whispered, "I left instead of fighting. I wish I'd known it was possible to do what you did." I didn't tell her it almost broke me. I just nodded. Because I understood. Back at Harpercross, the changes had taken root. The anonymous reporting system I proposed had been implemented. The vendor contract process now required independent oversight. Mira got promoted. So did the junior analyst who once sent me meeting notes when I was being quietly cut out of everything. Ronan's case became a case study in ethics seminars. His name, once feared, was now a footnote on what not to do. But for me, the real shift wasn't structural. It was personal. I no longer walked through the office with my eyes down or my voice measured to match the room. I didn't ask for space. I took it calmly, clearly, and without apology. And more than anything else, I learned this. Power doesn't always show up as volume. Sometimes it shows up in documentation, in timing, in one line of ink that says, "I will not disappear. I haven't." So, if you're watching this, if you've ever felt like the only one who noticed the wrong thing, or the only one willing to name others, what I want you to remember. You don't have to blow everything up to make a difference. Sometimes, you just have to change one word and mean it. If this story reminded you of a moment where you had to stand your ground quietly or boldly drop a justice in the comments, because your small act of clarity, it might be the beginning of something bigger than you can imagine.